Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of precision, like engineering, right?
Right, yeah. Like, it's totally binary.
Exactly. You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points and says, there it is.
Broken or not broken. Clean.
And it's comforting. I mean, we like things to be visible, to be categorized. But then you step into the modern workplace, and suddenly that x-ray machine is completely useless.
Oh, completely.
We're looking at a diagnostic landscape of, human behavior, competing deadlines, shrinking budgets, clashing personalities. It is murky.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. I mean, there's no simple illuminated X-ray that shows you exactly why a team is missing its quarterly targets or why morale in the sales department suddenly plummeted on a random Tuesday.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are throwing away the pristine textbook definitions of management and going straight into those muddy waters.
And the messy stuff.
Yeah, the messy stuff. We're taking a masterclass in organizational behavior management theory and strategic operations, but we're doing it entirely through the lens of the actual daily reality of the workspace. We want to translate these dense academic theories into a highly practical toolkit for you.
Because at its core, business is just people interacting with other people,
Hmm.
right? Usually under the pressure of constraints.
Always constraints.
Yeah. Whether you are a first-line supervisor, an aspiring manager, or honestly, just someone trying to survive your 9 to 5 without losing your mind, understanding the mechanics of these interactions is critical.
Think of it as discovering the cheat codes to human behavior in the office. And to even begin to use those cheat codes, we have to kind of rethink what management actually means.
Right.
Because when people hear the word manager, they usually picture, I don't know, someone with a corner office who signs vacation requests. The boss, yeah. But the foundational definition we're working from today, specifically Harold Kuntz's definition, is so much more psychological. He calls it the art of getting things done through and with people in formally organized groups.
And that phrasing is incredibly deliberate.
Yeah.
Through and with people.
Yeah.
The fascinating thing here is the psychological shift required to actually pull that off. Because when you're an individual contributor, say, a graphic designer or software engineer, your value is based entirely on what you can produce with your own 2 hands or your own brain.
You're doing the work.
Right. But the moment you become a manager, your value is no longer about doing the work. It is about facilitating the work of others. You have to literally let go of the tools and pick up the people.
Which, I mean, that sounds absolutely terrifying for someone who just got promoted specifically because they were the best at using the tool.
Oh, it's a huge shock to the system.
You see this all the time, right? Someone is an amazing software engineer, so they get promoted to engineering manager, and suddenly they're failing.
It's the classic trap. We promote the best salesperson to sales manager, and they just flounder because they keep trying to personally close deals rather than trying to build a system where 10 other people can close deals.
Yeah, they can't let go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Kuntz was brilliant to call it an art because managing people is inherently messy. You're constantly balancing multifaceted objectives. You have to achieve the organizational goals, provide growth, enhance efficiency, develop your employees, and somehow adapt to whatever economic change happens that week.
And how you balance those objectives completely depends on where you sit in the company hierarchy. If we look at the standard corporate structure, it's basically 3 levels.
Right. The pyramid.
The pyramid. You have top managers, the C-suite, who set the grand objectives, scan the market environment, and make those big 5-year plans.
The visionaries.
Yep. Then you have middle managers who take those plans, allocate the budgets, and oversee the execution. And finally, you have the first-line managers.
The supervisor.
The folks in the trenches. Exactly. They're coordinating the activities, overseeing the employees, living in the day-to-day operations.
They are the absolute reality check of the corporate world.
So let me try an analogy here. Is it fair to say top management is like the architect drawing the beautiful blueprints, middle management is the procurement team buying the materials, but first-line supervisors are the foremen on the ground making sure the house actually gets built without the roof caving in?
That is a perfect analogy. I love that. And because of that, first-line supervisors are arguably the most critical linchpin of any company.
Wow, really?
Absolutely. Because they translate the abstract visions of top management into daily, concrete actions. I mean, if the architect draws a beautiful roof, but the foreman doesn't know how to motivate the carpenters to actually swing the hammers, you don't get a house.
You just get a pile of incredibly expensive wood sitting in the rain.
Exactly, which brings up the actual skills needed to pull that off. When we break down managerial skills, there are generally four essentials.
Okay, let's hear them.
Diagnostic, which is the ability to look at a mess, identify the root problem, and solve it. Conceptual thinking abstractly about long-term strategies. Technical, knowing how the equipment or the software actually works. And human, the emotional intelligence to work effectively with others.
Okay, let me push back on this structure for a second.
Go for it.
If I am that foreman on the ground, do I need more technical skills or more human skills compared to, say, the CEO? Because if I'm running the site, I feel like I better know exactly how the nail gun works if it jams.
It's a great question. And the skill ratio shifts dramatically depending on where you are on that corporate ladder.
Yeah.
A CEO needs incredibly high conceptual and diagnostic skills.
You need to see the big picture.
Right. They have to see the whole global market. But they don't necessarily need to know how to code the specific software the company is selling. That's technical.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, a first-line supervisor absolutely needs higher technical skills than the CEO because they're directly supervising the people doing the physical work. However, and this is the crucial part of that, human skills are universally critical at every single level.
Okay.
The difference is a first-line supervisor is utilizing those human skills intensely, face-to-face, every single minute of the day.
Let's visualize that for the listener. Walk me through a day in the life of a supervisor who is forced to use these skills in real time.
Okay, let's picture a warehouse supervisor. We'll call her Sarah.
Okay, Sarah, the supervisor.
Right. So Sarah comes in on a Tuesday morning, and the company's overarching organizational goal handed down from top management is to increase shipping efficiency by 10% this quarter.
So that's her efficiency objective.
That's her target. But Sarah walks out onto the floor and sees a new hire. Let's call him Dave.
Oh, poor Dave.
Dave is really struggling to operate the new forklift. He's moving slowly, he's visibly nervous, and he is creating a massive bottleneck at the loading dock.
So Sarah's efficiency metric is actively tanking because of Dave.
Exactly. Her metrics are bleeding right in front of her. Now, her technical skills tell her exactly what Dave is doing wrong with the forklift's hydraulic controls. But her human skills are what she needs to actually fix the situation.
Because if she just uses her technical skills and barks orders...
Right, if she uses an old, outdated method and just yells at Dave to go faster, what happens?
Well, Dave panics, his stress goes up, he maybe drops a pallet of fragile goods, and efficiency plummets even further. Plus, he probably quits in 2 weeks.
Spot on. Instead, Sarah has to balance the efficiency objective with the employee development objective. She pulls Dave aside. She uses her human skills to calm his nerves, validating that learning the new machine is tough.
Empathy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then she uses her technical skills to give him a highly targeted 5-minute micro-training session on the forklift's turning radius.
Which takes time away from her efficiency goal.
Right. She actively loses 15 minutes of productivity right then and there. But she develops an employee who will safely and consistently hit the efficiency metrics tomorrow, the next day, and the next month.
That is the true art of getting things done through people.
Exactly.
That is such a brilliant micro-interaction, but it makes me wonder, how did we even figure out that Sarah needs to talk to Dave like a human being?
It wasn't always like this.
Right. Because if we rewind the clock 100 years, the prevailing wisdom would have been to just fire Dave on the spot or scream at him until he figured it out. How did we transition from treating people like disposable cogs in a machine to treating them like actual collaborators?
It is quite the historical journey. It really starts with what we call the classical approach, which gained massive traction during the height of the Industrial Revolution.
Okay, so late 1800s, early 1900s.
Yep. You have scientific management, pioneered by folks like Frederick Taylor and the Gilbreths. Their foundational assumption was that people are fundamentally rational and, honestly, almost mechanical.
Like robots.
Pretty much. Taylor essentially viewed workers as hands. He famously stood on factory floors with a literal stopwatch, timing every single motion a worker made, how long it took to lift a shovel, how far they turned their torso.
Wow.
He was trying to shave fractions of a second off a task to maximize pure efficiency and minimize waste.
Literally treating human beings like parts in an engine. Like if I just oil the joint or adjust the shovel handle, the machine moves faster.
Completely. The workers' internal life, their emotions, their fatigue, none of it mattered. And then, expanding on that classical umbrella, you have Administrative Principles by Henri Fayol.
Fayol, okay. What was his deal?
He zoomed out from the individual worker and looked at the broader organization. He came up with 14 principles of management, things like maintaining discipline, ensuring equity, and the scalar chain.
The scalar chain?
which just means a very rigid, clear line of communication from the very top to the very bottom. No skipping levels. He also pushed unity of command. And finally, you have Max Weber's concept of the bureaucratic organization. Strict hierarchies, impersonal rules, standardized procedures to guarantee predictable efficiency.
Okay, let's unpack fail's unity of command for a second, because that means every employee should have exactly one boss, one single person you take orders from.
Correct.
But think about the reality of the modern workplace. Almost everyone works in a matrix organization now. You might report to your daily project manager, but also your functional department head, and maybe a regional director. You're taking directions from 3 different managers at once. So is the classical approach just completely dead in the water today?
It's not entirely dead, but it has had to adapt aggressively. You have to remember, the classical approach was designed for factories where the output was a physical, standardized widget.
Right, making cars or steel.
Yeah. Unity of command makes perfect sense on a loud, dangerous assembly line where conflicting orders could actually get someone killed. But when the output of your company is knowledge, code, or creative problem solving, strict, rigid bureaucracy actually stifles the work, which is exactly why management theory had to evolve.
Which brings us to the neoclassical approach. And this hinges on a massive turning point in industrial psychology, the Hawthorne experiments. I love this part. This is such a cool piece of history.
Oh, the Hawthorne experiments are legendary. They took place in the 1920s and 30s at the Western Electric Hawthorne Works in Chicago. The researchers went in with a very classical scientific mindset.
Stopwatches and clipboards.
Exactly. They wanted to see if changing the physical environment, specifically the lighting on the factory floor, would improve worker productivity. So they took a group of workers, put them in a room, and made the lights brighter. And sure enough, productivity went up.
Which sounds like a massive win for Taylor's scientific management. Change the physical variable, increase the output.
It did. But then, as a scientific control, they dimmed the lights. They made them really dim, almost down to the level of moonlight. They fully expected productivity to crash. But instead, productivity went up again.
Wait, they could barely see the parts they were assembling, but they worked faster.
Yes. The researchers were entirely baffled. The physical environment was getting objectively worse, but the output was getting better. It took deep investigation to realize that the key variable wasn't the lights at all.
What was it?
It was the fact that the workers felt seen, heard, and cared about by the researchers. The researchers were pulling them aside, asking for their feedback, allowing them to form informal social groups. The very act of paying attention to employees boosted their morale, which directly and powerfully boosted their productivity.
That is such a wild, paradigm-shifting realization for the 1930s. Just treating people like they actually matter makes them work better.
It birthed the entire neoclassical approach to management. If Taylor saw workers as hands, the neoclassical approach realized that workers brought their hearts and minds to work too. They had deep psychological and social needs. If you ignored those informal social networks on the factory floor, you were leaving massive amounts of productivity on the table.
And that profound realization bridges us into the modern theory of management, which essentially integrates the cold, hard math of the classical approach with the human emotion of the neoclassical approach.
Right. It recognizes that today's employees want holistic happiness and lifestyle alignment, not just a paycheck for performing rote tasks.
Exactly.
Modern theory is highly integrative. You have the quantitative approach, which leans heavily into data, statistics, and complex management information systems. Think algorithms, computer simulations, predictive models for supply chains.
The tech side.
Yeah, but you balance that with the systems approach. This views a business not as a collection of isolated silos, but as a living, interconnected organism.
Give me an example of that.
Well, if the marketing department decides to launch a massive viral campaign, the systems approach forces you to ask, can the manufacturing line and the supply chain actually handle a 300% sudden spike in demand? You can't optimize one department if it completely breaks another.
Oh, that makes total sense. And arguably the most important modern approach for a supervisor is the contingency approach, which basically throws away the idea of a universal rulebook.
Throw it right out the window.
It says there is no one-size-fits-all method to managing. Managers have to adapt their style based on the exact specific situation in front of them. That feels incredibly freeing, but also really intimidating.
It is the ultimate double-edged sword. The contingency approach means you can't just memorize Fayol's 14 principles, walk into an office, and apply them blindly. You have to constantly read the room, analyze the available data, assess the emotional state of your team, and adjust your tactics on the fly.
That's exhausting.
It is. And honestly, this is where modern theory sometimes shows its limitations. It can sometimes become overly reliant on high-level data, or it focuses so heavily on grand, top-level corporate strategy that it completely forgets about the first-line supervisors who actually have to implement this fluid, ever-changing methodology.
Which is exactly why we are hyper-focusing on those supervisors today,
Yeah.
because armed with this modern, highly adaptable contingency mindset, a supervisor has to navigate daily chaos. And the absolute most frequent action they take in the midst of that chaos is making decisions under pressure.
Decision after decision.
Let's unpack how they actually do that.
Well, it all starts with planning.
Yeah.
Before you can make a decision, you need a framework. Planning is simply setting goals, defining the precise actions needed to achieve them, and organizing your resources. You are attempting to anticipate and control the future, and this happens on distinctly different time horizons.
Right, so at the very top, you have corporate or long-range planning. That's the C-suite looking 5 to 15 years out. You know, what new markets are we entering? Are we acquiring competitors?
The big bets.
Yeah. Then you drop down a level to medium-term planning, which is 1 to 5 years. How do we build the infrastructure for that 15-year goal? And then you have short-term operational planning, which is anything up to 1 year. And that is the exact sandbox where our first-line supervisors live. They are planning the shift, the weekly rotation, the quarterly targets.
And to execute those operational plans, they are forced to make decisions continually. Now, in a perfect, rational world, decision-making follows a very clean 7-stage process.
Let's hear the ideal version first.
Okay. You identify the decision that needs to be made. You gather all possible information. You identify every alternative. You weigh the evidence. You choose the best option. You act on it. And finally, you review the outcome. It sounds beautifully logical.
It sounds like a computer program.
Yeah.
And there are even analytical tools to make it feel even more scientific, like the decision tree. This is a tool used to visually map out choices, outcomes, probabilities, and costs. Let's walk through how this actually works for you if you're managing a team without getting bogged down in too much math.
All right, we'll keep the math light. A decision tree is just a visual map. Imagine you're a manager, and you need to decide what kind of internal software your team should build to improve efficiency. You start by drawing a square on a whiteboard. That's a decision node.
Square. Okay.
From that square, you draw 2 branches representing your choices. Option A is to build a brand new scheduling app, which will cost you $50,000 up front. Option B is to just upgrade the existing app you already have, which will cost $25,000.
Okay, so I've mapped out my initial spend, but I don't know if either of these will actually work.
Right, so at the end of those branches, you draw a circle, a chance node. This represents market uncertainty and probability. Let's look at option A, the $50,000 new app. Your data team tells you there is a 40% chance the team adopts it perfectly, and it saves the company a massive amount of money.
Yeah.
Let's call it a $200,000 payoff.
Nice.
But there's also a high probability, maybe 60%, that adoption is sluggish, and it only saves the company $100,000.
So how do I compare that to option B without just guessing?
You calculate the expected value. You multiply the potential payoff by the probability of it happening. For the big payoff, $200,000 times 40% is $80,000. For the smaller payoff, $100,000 times 60% is $60,000. You add those expected values together, $140,000, and then subtract your initial $50,000 cost. So the statistical expected value of option A is $90,000.
Okay, I'm following.
You do that exact same math for option B, and you simply choose the branch that generates the highest number.
It turns an incredibly stressful, ambiguous choice into a straightforward math equation. It's really elegant.
It's deeply elegant on a whiteboard. But here is where we violently hit reality.
Here we go.
The biggest barrier to effective decision-making in the real world is a concept called bounded rationality.
Yes, this concept is so validating. Break down bounded rationality for us.
Bounded rationality recognizes that human managers almost never have the time, the budget, or the sheer cognitive capacity to build a perfect, mathematically sound decision tree for every single problem they face.
We're just not built for it.
No. You are heavily bounded or restricted by the constraints of your organization. You have tight deadlines, conflicting departmental goals, and highly imperfect or incomplete information. Because of these limits, managers rarely find the absolute perfect, optimal solution to a problem. Instead, they do something called satisficing.
Satisficing.
Yeah, they settle for a solution that is simply satisfactory or good enough.
Bounded rationality sounds exactly like me standing in the grocery store aisle at 6:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. I am hungry, I am tired, I do not pull out my phone to calculate the optimum nutritional value to cost ratio of all 47 jars of pasta sauce.
Right, you don't have the capacity.
I am constrained by time and energy, so I just grab whatever jar looks familiar and is good enough so I can get home and eat. And this is a real question, is it actually okay for a professional, highly paid manager to run a team like that?
Not only is it okay, it is a survival mechanism.
What?
Absolutely. If a manager tried to mathematically optimize every single decision to absolute perfection, say, spending 3 full weeks analyzing the cost-benefit ratio of which brand of printer paper to buy, the entire organization would grind to a halt. Perfect is the enemy of good. Bounded rationality allows managers to act swiftly and keep the momentum of the business moving forward.
That takes so much pressure off. But what happens when the decision actually is massive? What if it's not printer paper, but a massive shift in team structure, and it's too big for one tired manager to make alone? You have to bring the team in. You move to group decision-making.
Right, and group decisions are the ultimate double-edged sword of management. The pros are incredibly compelling. When you bring a diverse group of minds together, you get a diversity of thought, you get more creative alternatives, and crucially, you get massive commitment to the final idea. People support what they help create. If the team decides on the solution, they will fight to make it work.
But the cons can be brutal.
They can. First, it takes exponentially more time. Second, you run headfirst into social loafing.
Oh, I hate social loafing.
We all do. This is when certain individuals just sit back, stay quiet, and let everyone else do the mental heavy lifting. Because individual accountability is hidden within the group dynamic. And most dangerously, you risk groupthink.
Groupthink.
Yeah. This is the psychological phenomenon where the desire for harmony and consensus overrides people's willingness to critically evaluate alternatives. Everyone just nods and agrees with the loudest person in the room, usually the boss, just to avoid conflict.
To combat that, managers have to be incredibly intentional about how they structure these meetings. You can't just put 10 people in a room and say, go. You have classic brainstorming, where the rule is to just throw every idea at the wall without criticizing anything, just to get the creative juices flowing. But the one I find fascinating is the nominal group technique.
Oh, it is incredibly effective. The nominal group technique strictly restricts verbal discussion initially.
Which is counterintuitive for a meeting.
Completely. You bring the team together, present the problem, and then require everyone to sit in total silence for 10 minutes and write down their ideas independently. Then, everyone presents their ideas one by one without debate. Finally, the group secretly votes on or ranks the ideas.
It totally neutralizes the loudmouth. The extrovert who usually dominates the first 5 minutes of a meeting and anchors the whole conversation is forced to stay quiet, and the brilliant introvert gets equal footing.
Exactly. There's also the Delphi technique, which is similar but used for remote experts. You send out anonymous surveys, compile the answers, and send them back out for refinement, completely removing interpersonal bias.
Very cool.
And if you really want to pressure test an idea, you use dialectical inquiry. You literally divide the room in half, give them opposing assumptions, and force them to debate the issue. It completely shatters groupthink because conflict is the explicit goal of the exercise.
But you can't build a reliable decision tree or run a nominal group session if you don't understand the irrational human beings actually executing those decisions. We have to decode the psychology of the team. We need to talk about organizational behavior.
Yes. Organizational behavior, or OB, is the systematic study of individual, group, and organizational behavior to improve effectiveness. It takes psychology, sociology, and cultural anthropology and applies them directly to the workplace. It is the study of why people act the way they do when they are on the clock.
And just like management theory evolved from Taylor's stopwatches, the models of how we view organizational behavior evolved dramatically over time. If you look at the historical progression, it starts in a very dark place with the feudal model.
Very dark.
Employees were viewed as entirely inferior, essentially property, driven solely by fear of survival. Then, as the industrial age matured, we moved to the autocratic model. This was driven by pure top management power. The manager said jump, and the employee's only acceptable response was how high. It demanded total, unquestioning obedience.
But obedience isn't loyalty. So the next evolution was the custodial model. Companies realized that if they wanted to keep skilled workers, they couldn't just terrorize them. They started offering security and benefits.
Like pensions.
Think of the old company towns, or Henry Ford paying a higher daily wage and offering pensions. The goal was to make the employee so dependent on the company's benefits that they wouldn't dare leave. It built a sort of passive loyalty.
Notice how we are slowly inching our way up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We went from survival to security. Then we arrive at the supportive model. Here, leadership shifts from dictating to supporting. The goal is to encourage genuine job satisfaction, recognizing that a happy worker is a productive worker. Then we move to the collegial model, which is heavily focused on teamwork, partnership, and the manager acting as a coach rather than a dictator.
Finally, we reach the human value model, which focuses on the inherent dignity of the employee, and the modern contingency model, which again says you adapt your model to the specific environment.
So let's ground this for the listener. If I am a manager who came up through the ranks under an old school autocratic boss, I am used to just demanding obedience. It's fast, it's efficient.
Yeah.
But if I realize my modern team needs the collegial model, they want to be treated like partners, how do I actually make that shift? I feel like if I suddenly stop giving orders and start asking for opinions, my team will think I've gone soft and I'll lose my authority.
It is a profound transition. The key is understanding that in the collegial model, authority isn't derived from fear or the title on your door. It is derived from trust, expertise, and mutual respect. You don't lose your authority, you transform it into influence.
Transform it into influence.
Right. Instead of saying, I have a problem, you go solve it. You say, we have a problem facing our department. How are we going to leverage our combined skills to solve it? You are still the decisive leader, but you are bringing them into the process. But to do that effectively, you have to understand how your team actually perceives the world.
Which brings us to the perceptual process. People don't react to reality. They react to their perception of reality. The process is broken down into 4 stages: receiving stimuli, selecting what to focus on, organizing it into mental patterns, and interpreting its meaning. How does this abstract psychological concept play out in a daily workplace conflict?
It is the root cause of almost every single office misunderstanding. Imagine a supervisor sends a very brief 5-word email to 2 different employees. See me in my office.
Oh, that's a scary email.
Right. That text on the screen is the received stimuli. It is identical for both. But the selection and interpretation vary wildly. The first employee, who is highly confident and just crushed a sales presentation, interprets this as, great, she wants to praise my work or ask for my input on the next phase.
They're excited.
Yeah. But the second employee, who suffers from deep imposter syndrome and made a minor typo on a report yesterday, interprets the exact same email as, I am absolutely getting fired today. The reality was identical. The perception was entirely different, driven entirely by their internal emotional state.
That is exactly why understanding personality is so crucial. And the gold standard for defining those internal states in the workplace is the Big 5 personality traits, also known as the Ocean model. These are conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, emotional stability, and openness to experience. Let's break these down.
Okay. Conscientiousness is arguably the strongest predictor of general workplace performance. It's about being careful, hyper-organized, dependable, and goal-oriented.
The people who actually read the manual.
Exactly. Extroversion is about being outgoing, drawing energy from social interaction, and being assertive. Agreeableness measures cooperativeness, empathy, and how much a person values harmony. Emotional stability, sometimes measured inversely as neuroticism, is the ability to stay calm, resilient, and balanced under pressure. And openness to experience measures curiosity, creativity, and a willingness to embrace novel, unconventional ideas.
So if I'm that first-line supervisor, I can use this framework to design my team's workflow, right? For example, if I have a massive, highly sensitive data entry project, say, migrating thousands of client records to a new CRM, and it requires someone to sit alone in a quiet room for 3 days without making a single error, I'm assigning that to my highly conscientious, perhaps slightly introverted employee. I am actively not assigning that to my highly extroverted, highly open employee who thrives on brainstorming and gets bored by repetitive details.
Precisely. You take that extroverted, agreeable employee and you make them the lead on the client-facing steering committee. Or you have them host the cross-departmental networking event. You are actively aligning their natural biological behavioral tendencies with the organizational goals. When you do that, work feels effortless to them. When you force a highly creative, open person to do strict data entry, you are forcing a square peg into a round hole, and both the employee and the data will suffer.
But to figure out who is a square peg and who is a round hole, you need incredible interpersonal communication skills. It's not just talking, it's verbal communication, nonverbal communication like reading body language, and digital communication nuances. And at the heart of it is active listening. This isn't just silently waiting for your turn to speak, it is intensely focusing on the speaker, interpreting the underlying emotion, and validating that you understand their perspective.
Active listening, combined with emotional intelligence, acts as a diagnostic tool. It allows a manager to truly uncover their team's Big Five traits. And once you truly understand their personalities, you are ready to tackle the absolute hardest part of management.
You know who they are. Now you have to get them moving. You have to decode motivation. We generally divide motivation into two massive buckets, intrinsic and extrinsic.
Intrinsic motivation is the holy grail.
Yeah.
It is driven entirely by internal factors. It's the sheer joy of solving a complex puzzle, the deep curiosity about a subject, or the passion for the craft itself. The work is the reward.
And extrinsic.
Extrinsic motivation is driven by external factors, earning your quarterly bonus, getting a prestigious new job title, or working late simply to avoid getting yelled at by the boss.
Beneath those broad buckets, there are very specific psychological drivers. You have power, which is the desire to influence others and control the environment. Fear, which is powerful but toxic, working purely to avoid negative consequences. Incentive, which is chasing a very specific, tangible reward.
Achievement, the deep desire to overcome difficult challenges and hit complex goals.
Affiliation, the very human need for belonging, teamwork, and social connection.
Competence, the drive to master a skill and be recognized as highly proficient.
And instrumental, which is viewing the job purely as a tool to achieve something else, like funding a side hustle.
As a supervisor, your primary task is to figure out which driver fuels which specific employee. That highly conscientious data entry employee might be driven deeply by competences. They want to be the absolute best at the software. The extroverted committee leader might be driven entirely by affiliation. They just want to build a great team culture.
Oh.
Once you pinpoint the driver, you can strategically use reinforcement to boost their performance.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When we talk about reinforcing performance, we talk about positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is incredibly intuitive. The employee does something great, you give them a reward, a bonus, public praise in the Slack channel, an extra day off. You add something good to encourage the behavior. But negative reinforcement, I need you to clarify this for me because I hear managers use this term constantly and they almost always get it completely wrong.
They get it wrong constantly. 90% of people assume negative reinforcement is just a fancy academic term for punishment. It is not. Punishment is adding something bad like yelling or giving a formal write-up to stop a bad behavior.
Right.
Negative reinforcement is actually a reward mechanism. It is the removal of something annoying, unpleasant, or unfavorable when the employee does the right thing. You are reinforcing the good behavior by taking away a pain point.
Wait, okay, so negative reinforcement is exactly like when my car finally stops incessantly beeping at me because I finally clicked my seatbelt into place. The removal of that deeply annoying beeping sound is my reward for the good behavior of buckling up.
That is the quintessential textbook example in behavioral psychology. Now, take that exact mechanic and apply it to a struggling employee. Let's say you have a sales rep who is completely missing their targets. So as a manager, you put them on a strict daily micromanagement check-in schedule. Every morning at 8 a.m., they have to show you their call log. For a professional, that is incredibly annoying and slightly humiliating.
It's the workplace equivalent of the seatbelt beep. It's an unfavorable condition.
Exactly. But then the employee puts their head down and finally starts hitting their sales targets consistently for 3 weeks. This is where you use negative reinforcement. You call them in and say, your numbers are fantastic lately. You've earned your autonomy back. I am taking you off the daily check-ins. We'll just meet once a week now. You have removed the unfavorable condition to actively reward and reinforce their excellent performance.
That makes total, crystal clear sense. And it's so much more effective than just yelling at them. But you also have to be careful with how you deploy these reinforcements. Frequency matters. You can't praise someone every 5 minutes or it loses its meaning. Equity matters. If you give a bonus to one person for a project but ignore their partner, you destroy morale. The system has to be fundamentally fair.
And crucially, non-monetary rewards like giving someone public recognition or paying for them to attend a career development seminar often have a much longer-lasting impact than just throwing a $50 gift card at them.
Which ties directly into the broader concept of employee welfare and job satisfaction. Welfare isn't just about salaries. It encompasses comprehensive health insurance, genuinely safe physical working conditions, and actively protecting their work-life balance so they don't burn out. When employees are deeply satisfied with their total environment, retention skyrockets. You don't lose your best talent to the competitor across the street.
But what if the welfare is great, the pay is fine, but the actual daily job itself is just painfully boring?
Huh.
How do you motivate someone when the work is tedious?
Right.
This is where job design strategies come in. You have job enrichment, which is vertically adding more complex responsibility to a role to make it more meaningful. You have job rotation, which is laterally moving people around between different tasks so they don't get repetitive strain injury or mental burnout.
But my absolute favorite concept here is job crafting. This is where employees are actively empowered to shape and mold their own jobs to better fit their unique skills and passions.
Job crafting is an incredibly powerful tool because it taps directly into that elusive intrinsic motivation we talked about earlier. It gives the employee a profound sense of autonomy over their professional destiny.
Let's give the listener a real-world visualization of job crafting. Imagine you manage a customer service call center. It's a grind. You have a rep who is very good on the phone, incredibly empathetic, but you know from chatting with them in the break room that their real burning passion is graphic design. They do it constantly on the weekends.
Okay.
But right now, they're getting burned out taking angry calls 40 hours a week. A brilliant manager using job crafting would pull them aside and say, hey, for 10% of your week, say, every Friday afternoon, you don't have to take a single call. Instead, I want you to use your design skills to completely redesign and illustrate our team's onboarding and training manuals because, frankly, they look terrible.
Wow.
You haven't changed their official HR job title, you haven't changed their pay bracket, but you have allowed them to craft their role to include something they intrinsically deeply love.
And look at the cascading benefits of that single decision. You retain a highly empathetic employee who now feels deeply valued and seen as a whole person. You prevent their burnout. And as a bonus, the company gets vastly superior training manuals that help the rest of the team. Everyone wins. But implementing job crafting requires a manager who is secure enough to give up a little bit of rigid control and implicitly trust their team.
Which perfectly transitions us into the role of the captain steering the ship. You can have the most beautifully designed jobs, a deep understanding of personality traits, and a perfect negative reinforcement strategy. But without actual leadership, the entire structure eventually collapses. We define leadership broadly as the ability to influence the behavior of people toward the achievement of organizational goals. It's setting the vision, organizing the chaos, initiating the action, and providing direction.
And, crucially for our context, acting as the vital translation link between upper management's abstract goals and the worker's daily reality. But how a leader actually goes about influencing that behavior can vary wildly. Management theory generally outlines three core styles of leadership.
Right. First, you have the autocratic or authoritative style. This is highly centralized control. The boss holds all the power, makes the decision in a vacuum, gives the orders, and expects immediate, unquestioning obedience. Second, you have the participative or democratic style. Here, the leader actively consults subordinates, genuinely encourages suggestions, and often makes decisions based on group consensus.
And the third.
Third, you have the free rein or laissez-faire style. This is where the leader steps way back and gives almost complete freedom and autonomy to the subordinates to set their own goals and solve their own problems. Now, I have to push back on that last one.
I figured you might.
If laissez-faire gives the team complete freedom to do whatever they want, isn't that just a manager being lazy? Aren't they literally abandoning their job responsibilities? Why would a supervisor ever use that?
It absolutely looks like laziness if it is applied to the wrong team in the wrong context. But think back to the contingency approach. Everything depends entirely on the situation. Let's look at a practical, real-world breakdown of exactly when a master manager would deploy each of these three distinct styles.
Okay, lay the scenarios on me.
Scenario 1. When do you use the autocratic style? When there is a literal physical fire in the building. Or, in a corporate sense, when a massive PR crisis hits and a public statement must go out in 10 minutes to save the stock price. There's absolutely no time to call a committee meeting, run a nominal group technique, and vote on which exit to use. You need a centralized, authoritative leader to point at the door and say, everyone go that way right now.
Makes total sense. High crisis, low time equals autocratic. What about democratic?
You use democratic when the decision is complex, you have ample time, and you desperately need long-term buy-in from the team. Let's say you are deciding on the new project management software the entire department will be forced to use for the next 5 years. If you autocratically force a clunky software on them from on high, they will resent it, they will hate you, and they will secretly find inefficient workarounds.
True.
If you bring them into the process, let them test options, and vote democratically, they will champion the software because it was their choice.
Okay, so crisis is autocratic, buy-in is democratic. When does laissez-faire actually become the correct choice?
Imagine you are a manager overseeing a team of senior, highly specialized PhD researchers working on a breakthrough, highly complex pharmaceutical drug. You, as the manager, might have a brilliant MBA, but you do not understand organic chemistry better than they do.
Not at all.
If you try to autocratically dictate how they should run their molecular experiments, you will destroy the project and insult their expertise. In this highly specific scenario, your job in a laissez-faire setup is to secure their grant funding, violently protect them from annoying corporate bureaucratic distractions, and then give them complete, unhindered freedom to do the genius work they are uniquely qualified to do. In that environment, laissez-faire isn't lazy. It is the most sophisticated and effective form of leadership possible.
Wow, okay, that completely shifts my perspective on that style. It all goes back to contingency matching the tool to the problem. But that leads to a deeper philosophical question. Where does the ability to wield those tools even come from? Are great leaders born, or are they made? Management theorists have argued about this for a century, resulting in 7 core theories of leadership.
It's a fascinating evolution of thought. We start with the oldest, the great man theory. This posits that leaders are simply born, not made. You either have the magical inherent DNA of a Caesar or a Napoleon, or you don't. Very closely related to that is the trait theory, which softens it slightly, but still argues that successful leaders possess inherent, genetically predetermined qualities like innate courage, extreme extroversion, or natural confidence.
I have to be honest, both of those theories feel incredibly fatalistic. If you aren't born with the magical leadership gene, you might as well just give up and stay an individual contributor forever.
They are fatalistic, and thankfully, modern organizational behavior has largely moved entirely past them, because the next evolution is behavioral theory. This is the crucial bridge. Behavioral theory states that leadership is not defined by internal DNA, but by observable external actions. And the beautiful, liberating thing about actions is that they can be studied, practiced, and learned. A person who is naturally introverted and shy can actively learn the behaviors of a great leader and execute them perfectly.
I love that. I want to underline that for anyone listening who doubts their potential. Leadership is a set of observable behaviors you can actively learn and master. It is not just a genetic lottery you lost at birth.
Absolutely. It is a skill set, not a trait. And the subsequent theories build on this growth mindset. You have transformational theory, which focuses on a leader whose primary behavior is inspiring, changing, and growing every member of their organization to reach higher levels of morality and motivation. You have transactional theory, which is more pragmatic, focusing on motivating members through a clear, consistent system of rewards and punishments, managing the daily transactions of work. And finally, you have the situational and contingency theories, which we've been discussing, stating that the most effective leadership behavior constantly morphs based on the environment and the maturity of the team.
Okay, so we have covered a massive amount of ground. We've covered the psychology of the individual employee, we've covered the dynamics of the group, and we've covered how the supervisor leads them through decisions. But a supervisor doesn't exist in a vacuum. They are a cog in a much larger machine. They exist inside a massive corporate structure. That brings us to our final macro-level perspective, the bigger picture, TQM, change, and global strategy. A first-line supervisor has to somehow align their small team's daily actions with these massive, overarching global goals.
And that alignment is dictated by the strategic management process. It's a continuous, never-ending cycle. It starts with goal setting at the top, then a rigorous analysis of the internal strengths and external market environment, then strategy formulation, then strategy implementation, and finally evaluation and control to see if it worked. Top management spends all their time formulating the grand strategy, but those first-line supervisors are the ones who bear the burden of actually implementing it.
And one of the most famous sweeping operational strategies they might be asked to implement is TQM, Total Quality Management. It was revolutionary in manufacturing and has spread everywhere. TQM is a comprehensive, organization-wide approach fundamentally focused on continuous incremental improvement, deep customer satisfaction, and long-term success. It's about systematically reducing errors and streamlining every process. The core principles demand employee involvement at every level, highly process-centered thinking, and strictly fact-based decision-making.
Let's focus deeply on those last two principles: process-centered thinking and fact-based decisions. Because at first glance, for a first-line supervisor, being told your team is switching to total quality management sounds like a nightmare of new paperwork. But if implemented correctly, TQM is actually a massive psychological stress reliever for a manager.
Really, because total quality management sounds like the ultimate stressful, sterile corporate buzzword.
It becomes a buzzword when companies just slap the label on without changing their culture. But fundamentally, true TQM shifts the target of blame. In a traditional non-TQM environment, if a product comes off the assembly line broken or a major software bug is released, the manager's first instinct is to pull the employee into the office and yell at them, "You messed up, you weren't paying attention."
Right.
It becomes deeply personal, the employee gets defensive, trust is destroyed, and morale plummets. Under TQM, the foundational assumption is that people inherently want to do a good job. So if a product is broken, you emphatically do not blame the person, you blame the process.
You look at the systemic data, fact-based decision.
Yes, the supervisor and the employee literally sit down together on the same side of the table looking at the broken product, and they interrogate the process. Was the training manual inadequate? Was the machine slightly uncalibrated? Was the lighting on the floor too dim? Going back to Hawthorne?
Were they rushed by an unrealistic quota?
Exactly. By blaming the process instead of the individual, you foster deep teamwork and psychological safety. You and the employee are allied against the broken system rather than pitted against each other.
That is a massive paradigm shift in how to handle failure. But implementing TQM or any big new system means the organization has to undergo profound change, and humans hate change. We divide organizational change into two buckets: unplanned changes, which are reactive, chaotic, and crisis-driven, like a sudden supply chain collapse, and planned changes, which are deliberate, proactive, and strategic. So I need your practical expertise here. How does a first-line supervisor handle the inevitable pushback of planned organizational change? Let's say corporate sends down a mandate. We are outsourcing all of our HR functions and migrating the entire company to a completely new, highly complex software system next month. The team on the ground is terrified. They're worried they won't know how to use the software, they will look stupid, or worse, they're terrified that their own jobs are going to be outsourced next. How do you get a panicking team on board?
Managing resistance to change is arguably the hardest psychological test a manager will face. You cannot just point to the corporate memo and demand compliance, reverting back to the autocratic model. That breeds sabotage. You have to actively manage the emotional resistance. First, you utilize transparent, relentless communication. You don't just tell them what is happening, you exhaustively explain the why behind the change.
Because maybe the old software was a massive cybersecurity risk that could have bankrupted the company.
Yeah, Second, you provide extensive, almost excessive training and resources. You make absolutely sure they feel competent in the new system, tying directly back to the competence driver of intrinsic motivation we discussed. And third, you actively involve them in the micro-implementation. You tell them, corporate picked the software, but I want this team to design exactly how we integrate it into our daily workflow. If they have a tangible say in how the change affects their specific day, they regain a sense of autonomy and the fear dissipates.
You are essentially applying the collegial model of partnership to soften the blow of an autocratic corporate mandate. It's brilliant. And speaking of massive corporate mandates, the text finishes by zooming out to the absolute highest macro-level strategies a company can employ: BPO and IOB. BPO is business process outsourcing. This is the strategic subcontracting of non-core operations, things like IT support, payroll, or customer service call centers to specialized third-party vendors. The goal is to save massive amounts of costs and access specialized expertise so the core company can focus strictly on what it does best.
And IOB is the internationalization of business, taking the company global. The strategic drivers for this are irresistible to a CEO. Massive market expansion, finding millions of new customers, cost efficiency in manufacturing, resource access tapping into brilliant foreign engineering talent or cheaper raw materials. But the allure of going global often blinds companies to the incredibly intense operational challenges this brings.
Yeah, the hurdles are not just logistical, they're deeply human. You have massive cultural differences. You aren't just translating language, you are translating motivation. An incentive structure that highly motivates an individualistic American sales team might deeply offend a collectivist team in Japan. Then you have technical barriers dealing with entirely different infrastructure, internet reliability, or supply chain maturity. You have country risk, which is navigating unpredictable political instability, sudden changes in trade laws, or new tariffs. And monetary risk, constantly managing wild currency exchange rate fluctuations that can wipe out a quarter's profit overnight. The takeaway here is profound. If a company doesn't have a rock-solid management foundation at home, if they don't fundamentally understand organizational behavior, intrinsic motivation, and bounded rationality at the local level, expanding globally won't save them, it will simply multiply their dysfunction and broadcast it on a world stage.
Exactly right. You cannot successfully manage a diverse team across 3 distinct time zones and 4 wildly different cultures if you haven't first mastered the basic art of getting things done through people in your own home office. The foundation has to be human-centric.
Which brings us beautifully full circle. We have been on an absolute journey today. We started over 100 years ago with Frederick Taylor holding a cold stopwatch, viewing workers as mindless, interchangeable cogs in a machine. And we trace the messy, complex evolution of thought all the way to modern, empowered employees engaged in job crafting, guided by transformational leaders who understand their psychological needs.
It's quite the arc.
We've decoded how managers use expected value math and decision trees to tame chaos, why the psychological safety net of bounded rationality keeps us from losing our minds in the grocery store aisle, and exactly how to use the big 5 personality traits to build a team that actually functions. We even managed to rescue negative reinforcement from its terrible reputation.
We covered an immense amount of ground. But if there is one overarching, unifying theme to all these textbook theories, it's that human beings are infinitely complex, and managing them requires ultimate flexibility.
And that leads to a final, somewhat provocative thought for us to chew on as we wrap up. Everything we've discussed today culminates in the modern contingency approach. That approach explicitly, fundamentally states that there is no one single strategy that works for every firm, every team, or every situation. Everything depends on the context. So, does that mean the ultimate mark of a true master manager isn't just knowing all the intricate rules and theories we just talked about, but rather knowing exactly when it is necessary to break them?
That is the true art of management, isn't it? The science, the theories, the data, they give you the framework, they draw the lines on the field. But the art is having the emotional intelligence to know when the human element right in front of you demands that you step entirely outside those lines.
I absolutely love that. The pristine diagnostic x-ray machine is broken, but we have the psychological tools to navigate the muddy waters anyway. I encourage you as you head into your workspace tomorrow, just observe. Don't try to change everything at once. Just look around and try to spot which of these theories are playing out in real time right in front of you. See if you can spot the bounded rationality in your boss's rushed decisions, or try to identify the big 5 traits in your coworkers during a meeting. You might just find those cheat codes starting to work. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.